how to do things. If you're going to have outbound investment controls, how you set that way that works. That's not just a huge bureaucracy. And so far, all the conversations have been quite rational about it.
I mean, JPMorgan obviously has a significant business in China. I'm sure that the government there would listen to you. What are the conversations you have just about sort of trying to, as I say, trying to maintain as cordial relations as possible between the two nations?
I mean, look, for us, we're there. And like I said, we're basically taking a back seat to an American government in this one. And we obviously have to do whatever the American government asks us to do. And we're trying to engage in a conversation with our own government and with the Chinese government on what those things should be. I'm hoping cooler heads prevail here. But this is why Ukraine is so important. This can cause it to go in a bad direction rather quickly. So, everyone's got to be just a little cautious.
We talk about our own government. Let's talk about the Fed for a moment. Obviously, I just want to talk about the Fed for a moment. I have half a dozen prosaic questions I could ask you about the Fed. I think I know the answer to many of them, so I'll try and avoid. One fairly easy one is, when do we get to say we're landing, be that a hard landing or a soft landing? Sort of when does that begin to occur?
Forecasting the futures, as you know, very complicated. The consumer still has a lot more money in their checking accounts than before COVID. They're spending 10% more than last year, 40% more than pre-COVID, and it looks like they'll have excess money to spend roughly until the end of the year. And at that point, you can say, is it a little bit of a cliff? Is it a soft landing? And also, QT has now started to bite. That also is going to happen at one point, probably later this year, and that's when you're going to know what these things do. But we can still have a soft landing. The other thing about all this economic forecasting is Russia-Ukraine. I mean, that can change it dramatically and very, very quickly.
Do you think absent Russia-Ukraine, we will have a soft landing?
I think it's still possible, but I look at possibilities.
Likely or possible?
Possible. I think a mild recession is possible, a harder recession is possible. I think there's a good chance that inflation will come down, but not enough by the fourth quarter. The Fed may actually have to do more. And I think a lot of things that have happened in the world, think of the bigger trends, are inflationary. Infrastructure spending, the IRA Act, lessening trade with certain parts of the world, bringing trade back into America. Those things are all, the green transition is going to take a lot of capital. So all those things kind of have inflationary attributes that are very different than we've been through the last 20 years.
I'm going to come back to the consumer point in a second, but last year you talked about in your letter this sort of confluence of three major factors: QT, America rebounding from a sort of post-COVID economy fairly strongly, and then obviously the war as well. You talked about them sort of leading us into an unprecedented period. How do we get out of that period?
It's diplomacy. I mean, that's why this is not, we always talk about uncertainty in the economy and the uncertainty. I call it normal uncertainty. The weather's, we know what the weather's like. That's why these things are different. QT, coming out of COVID, the war in Ukraine. I think it's been pushed out a little bit further. I would have thought we'd be dealing with this a little bit sooner, but it does look like some of that stuff is coming to fruition at the end of this year. Russia-Ukraine, we just simply don't know. I think it's wrong to didn't predict, because if you look at the history of wars, they've been pretty much unpredictable, and how they play out and which ones affect the global economy and how they do. If you look at a lot of wars, they didn't affect the global economy, but they were literally in very small parts of the economy. This is not in a small part of the economy. And this is a European nation. It's Russia, and it's oil and major oil and gas supply and food supply around the world. So this is a whole different attribute to it.
But then why does the consumer, particularly here in the U.S., remain, as you say, fairly bullish?
Well, for over a period of time, their home price has been going up. Jobs are plentiful. Wages are going up at the lower end, which I think is a good thing. They've got a lot of money in their checking account. Stocks generally had gone up for 10 or 15 years. The consumer is, if you look at it today, in great shape. But I'm telling you, that's going to end at one point. But even if we go into recession, then the consumer is entering a recession in better shape, far better shape than they did in 08. In 08, when we went into that recession, not only did unemployment go through the roof, but their home prices were dropping dramatically, jobs were disappearing, the stock market was way down. So this one is a little bit better than that.
One of the sort of narratives that is fairly popular at the moment is that the consumer doesn't like uncertainty. even go as far as saying it's sort of one of these false axioms that people adopt now. That when it's times are uncertain, the consumer freaks out, they stop spending, they stop doing the things that the consumer needs to do to keep the economy going. That doesn't seem to be the case here. The consumer's done pretty well through uncertainty, through COVID, through the war, through everything else. So I wonder when we get to this point of the wallet being hit and the consumer saying we're going to stop spending, is it just reality catching up with them? Is there some kind of inflection point, or is it just that they run out of money?
I think everything is distorted by COVID, including, quote, uncertainty. So you are absolutely correct. Confidence, consumer confidence is dropping, but I think their pocketbook trumps confidence. When they have a lot of money, they tend to spend it. And you see here, look at the travel in Miami and the building and the optimism around. If you ask them how they're doing, it's very good. And then they tell you they're not confident about the economy. So jobs are plentiful. Wages are going up. I mean, that's what's really affecting them. And they wake up in the morning, they feel pretty good about that. And then they read the paper, and of course you can get a little depressed.
And your view is that at the end of this year, or towards the end of this year, that sort of begins to tail off? Confidence?
It looks like the excess cash will be disappearing, and then, but the jobs are still there, so that's why I said you could have a soft landing. So
now, Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, his specter continues to haunt the global elite, and most recently, JPMorgan have been sort of caught up in it. How has that made you feel?
I can't talk about litigation, but you should know that at JPMorgan we got top experts, including some of the best people that come out of the DOJ, et cetera, who review and make judgment decisions like this. And they generally do a very good job.
But how has it made you feel as the CEO of JPMorgan, as a figurehead for the bank?
It's unfortunate, but it's life.
And look, we're here in Florida. We have to talk about politics because we always talk about politics. Obviously, we're in DeSantis' backyard. What do you make of his, if you like, hands-on approach to business? And is that something you would like to see more of in even higher office?
Who's hands-on approach?
DeSantis.
Yeah. I learn and listen and read and stuff like that. It has got a little complicated between business and government and stuff like that. But anyone here knows that I'm a full-throated, red-blooded, American patriot supporter of free enterprise. So, I hear the complaints on both sides, but you listen and learn from that. I don't worry that much about it. And we've loved Florida. We're growing in Florida left and right. Small businesses, large companies. I've got how many total employees we have here. I'm on my way to Tampa. We've got major operations there. Orlando, major operations. We're opening branches, and so the mayor just joined us at a small business event we did here. We're very pro Florida. And
this is long dated Florida. This isn't part of the sort of recent influx of capital into Florida or financial world into Florida, perhaps.
Well, I think they've been great. I mean, if you were running the state, you should be thinking, how can I make the state well off for my people? So Florida likes business. They want you to come. You come to Florida, you see the opposite. Texas is the same way. If I was some other states, I'd be thinking about, why do people like going to these states? It's their taxes, it's their pro-business, they want better life for their people. It's not necessarily some of the policies we talk about. So, we now have more employees in Texas than in New York State. It should have been that way, but Texas loves to be there. And when you go there, they're optimistic. They're optimistic here. Pro-American, optimistic, pro-business.
Not so much?
No, unfortunately, no.
Every year there's a sort of tech topic du jour that we talk about. Last year was the metaverse, and I think we talked briefly about you appearing in a non-physical form in the lobby of the metaverse. This year it's AI. I asked ChatGPT what I should ask Jamie Dimon. I was hoping it would come up with a really smart answer. I wouldn't need to write any of my questions. I could get it to do the whole interview for me. So it didn't, unfortunately. It asked what would I ask Jamie Dimon about AI and what it meant for the future of investment banking.
So AI is real. This is not
crypto?
That's not crypto. This is a technology which is staggering. We already use 300 AI. We have thousands of people involved, in data, machine learning, natural language processing. We have 200 people in AI research labs, and we're already using it to do risk, fraud, marketing, prospecting, and it's the tip of the iceberg. So, to me, this is extraordinary. And the other thing to keep in mind, there's good use, but bad guys are going to use it too. So it's a little bit of an arms race in how you have to use it to protect your company, protect your clients, protect data, et cetera. And we're fully engaged. And the other thing you have to keep about AI, you need to be in the cloud to use the compute power, fundamentally, that you need for AI. And so that's why the cloud, digital AI, they're all kind of related that way.
What was behind the decision to ban ChatGPT on the trading floors?
On company-owned devices, that's why you could do it in your own device, but we also allow people to use it within our own firewalls. So we didn't take it away, it's just you have to go within our firewall to use it. And it was just for control purposes and risk purposes. Wasn't a statement of any time.
Before we end up, I want to get onto leverage finance. Obviously, that's in large part why we're here to talk about the conference. One of the things JPMorgan's doing at the moment that's very interesting is lending from its own balance sheet, direct lending, if you like. At the moment, I think it's $10 billion is what's been allocated. How big can that business get?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's amazing. And this is, when you look at something like this, for your viewers, American capitalism, there are 2,000 investors here from around the world, hundreds of companies still inventing ideas and growing and expanding both in the U.S. and overseas. It is extraordinary. So direct lending, obviously one of the biggest lenders out there, but a lot of the people here are also huge lenders. So, I meet with them all, and direct lending away from banks has become equally in size.
They like to think of themselves as competitors.
They are. That's a lot. But we deal with competitors and collaborators all the time. So we do direct lending, and all it is fundamentally for your viewers, unitranche, quicker, more flexibility in certain types of covenants. Not necessarily cheaper for the borrower, by the way. So you got to look at it, all things. So we've done, I think, 10 billion, 40 deals. We could do a lot more. And we can work with partners on some of these deals, et cetera. But we'll do what we need to do to compete.
It feels somewhat passé to ask you about succession. You get asked about it all the time. I'm not going to do that. But I am interested. You talk a lot about the need for sort of unified responses to global conflict. You talk a lot about things that are needed domestically, whether it's better health, better education, raising wage inequality, or reducing, I should say, wage inequality. It seems very obvious that you could go into public office if you chose to when you leave JPMorgan. Is that something we can expect? I'm
not going to go to public service. I love what I do here. You mentioned succession.
But you might enjoy it.
I think you should practice it a little bit before you go into it. And I feel what I do here is a huge contribution to my country, my clients around the world, et cetera. So, and the other thing about succession, you guys already know that we have a lot of potential successors. So
we write about it frequently.
Exactly. So, I couldn't add to that. You already know.
All right. So. Jamie Dimon, great conversation. Thanks so much for having us. And with that, Guy, I'll turn it back to you in New York.
Thank you very much indeed. Our great thanks to JPMorgan Chase Chairman and CEO Jamie Dimon, along, of course, with our own Ed Hammond. A pretty wide-ranging conversation, lots discussed there, wrapping up on ultimately where he sees his future. But it sounds like, Kayleigh, he's got an awful lot that he still wants to do at the bank.
Well, and on the subject of the future as well, I thought his remarks on the future of the U.S. economy were quite interesting. Him saying that right now the consumer is doing really well. They still have more in their checking accounts than they did before COVID. They are still going to spend. But he said at some point that's going to end. It's the question of when that ends, Guy, ultimately. That is a conversation not just for the banks, but for the Federal Reserve as well.
He clearly sees a lot of volatility coming. He is clearly concerned about what is going to happen maybe next year with the consumer. But he started off talking about Ukraine, and that is clear. That geopolitical risk he certainly sees as being pretty much high on his risk agenda right now. Ukraine, China, etc.
Yeah, I thought his remarks on China were fascinating. That is a conversation they will be continuing coming up. Wendy Cutler, Asia Society Vice President, will be joining Balance of Power with David Weston on both Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. Thanks so much for joining us. That wraps it up for me and Guy. This is Bloomberg.